Okay, we're gonna ignore the fact that the lighting is poor and that I'm sitting in my car in my garage. Why am I doing this? I don't know. You're not getting any Christmas content this year. I wanted to do something Christmas themed for Christmas, but I didn't have the time. Hopefully I'll be able to do it next year. Anyway, what I want to talk about today. Annoying people I've argued with on the internet. Yes, I recognize it was my own fault for continuing to engage with them after they proved how, but I continued arguing with them anyway. The first person I want to talk about is someone I got into an argument with in the comments section of Pinterest. Now, I recognize someone I got into an argument with in the comments section of Pinterest was my first mistake. I made this mistake many times over the course of my life, but I'm only going to tell you about a couple of them today. So the first person, I know him, I remember him by name. His name was Greg Universe, and I hated that little... He was so annoying. He called himself, like, a centrist, or like someone who wasn't really interested in being on one side of the political spectrum. No, he was just a stereotypical misogynistic, condescending man who was very much on the right-wing side of things, though considering American politics, it might have actually been considered centrist. I don't know. But he thought himself to be like this objective viewer of reality and the state of like different people's issues, and he would give his opinions on, mostly I saw him talk about like women and feminism and that sort of thing, but that was also the area of Pinterest I was on more than like other types of political stuff. But what made him so specifically annoying was that he had this thing that he would do every time I would argue with him. And if you don't know anything about the mobile version of Pinterest, it might have changed by now, but I'm pretty sure it hasn't. But if you don't know anything about the mobile version of Pinterest, they only let you see so many comments in like a comment thread. So like if you have a comment and it's like, you know, see more comments, and you push that button, it only shows you like the most recent dozen or so, something like that. Maybe a little bit more than that. And if you try and like get more comments, there's like a limit. So like if you have a really long like comment thread with someone and you're on mobile, you can't see the whole conversation. You can only see part of it. So he would do this really annoying thing where he would claim that he said something. He would say, scroll back up and it's not my problem, you can't read. But he would have never said the thing that he claimed he said. And he would always make this statement when it was too late to go back and look. Like, you couldn't scroll up. The only way you could look is if you, like, went and got on, like, Pinterest online, like, on your computer or something instead of using the mobile app. I remember there was someone else who got into an argument with him in that same, like, comment thread that I got into, and we started, like, DMing, and I was like, hey, I want another opinion. Did he ever say this? And she was like, I went back and looked. He never said this. And he would do this every single time we argued. And it was the most annoying thing ever, because it was like his trump card. It was like I said this thing, and because you never refuted it, that makes me right. And because you can't prove that I never said it, therefore I did. And it was just, God, I hated arguing with him. And it took me far too long to realize that it was better to just not engage with this. It was not worth the blood pressure issues I probably have from arguing with him now. The second person was also someone in the Pinterest comment section. Again, my own mistake. This was a vegan. Now, I have no problem with vegans. Like, if you want to be vegan, whether it's like some necessary thing because of like health reasons, or you just want to eat healthier, or like some sort of like moral, like this is what you feel is the most moral thing, like whatever your reason for being a vegan, I don't care. You go be vegan. Doesn't matter to me. Where we start having an issue is where you try to claim that you have some sort of moral superiority over me as a non-vegan. That's when we start having issues. We especially start having issues when you don't recognize that, like, being vegan isn't, like, realistic for everyone. Both because of price and because of, like, a lot of vegan substitutes are, like, allergies, are common allergies for people. So, like, some people just, it's not realistic for them to be vegan. And where we really have an issue is whenever you don't recognize that vegan alternatives, like the way that we have those substitutes, oftentimes hurts human people. Like, you know, humans, because of the poor working condition of the people, like, harvesting and whatever your vegan alternatives. This particular person went past that. So not only did they try and like claim their moral superiority because they think that killing animals is murder, and that, you know, that's the same as like murdering a human and that makes them more moral or whatever. And like, don't, like this, like, I recognize that the meat industry is like awful. It's horrible. I wish that it didn't exist. Like, I get it that like a significant number of animals are treated incredibly inhumanely, and that is awful, and it needs to be changed. Like, I recognize that, but I don't think that like killing an animal in order to eat is the same as killing a human, period, in sentence and tweet. But what just blew my mind when arguing this person wasn't the moral superiority, wasn't the insistence that killing an animal was the same as killing a human, wasn't the lack of recognition that being vegan isn't realistic for some people. It was the racism, but in a way that I've never experienced before. Not the like complete disregard for people of color who are harvesting their whatever the honey substitute is. No. It was the statement that the meat industry is the same as the Holocaust. That was a thing that they said, was that the meat industry, the way that animals are treated in the meat industry, is comparable to the Holocaust. They also said that Native Americans who have like, you know, hunting tradition and eating animals and that is part of like their culture is also not a valid reason to eat animals. So, you know, racism in a really, really bad, just, yeah, they said that the Holocaust was comparable to the meat industry was comparable to the Holocaust. That was the hill they chose to die on. And it was at that point that I was like, okay, I am exiting this conversation because I can't help you, boo. If you're going to choose that as your hill to die on, I'm just gonna leave. I'm just gonna leave. The last person I want to talk about was someone I got into an argument with in the comment section of YouTube. I stand by the fact that that's a better place to get into an argument than the comment section of Pinterest, but like, you think what you will about my decision to do that. This was in the comment section of a video. I don't actually remember what the video was about. It had something to do with religion. I know that. It might have been the video talking about like everything wrong with the first chapter of Genesis, but it also could have been a different video. I don't remember, but I got into like a theology argument with this guy, right? Which, like, whatever. I kind of like arguing about that sort of thing. Like, if you have a difference in like your religious perspective and you want to like have a discussion about it, like, yeah, that's cool. I kind of enjoy that. And that's what I thought I was getting into with this guy, and it actually not all that quickly devolved into not that. He masqueraded as someone who, like, I could actually have a conversation with long enough that I stuck this out way longer than I probably should have. So he, if I remember correctly, the comment was something about how, like, science can't explain how life came from non-life, or, like, I think that was maybe a part of his comment, and I was like, actually, there's, like, you know, a good scientific explanation, there's lots of evidence behind it, and I remember, I was like, if you don't know, like, the process of evolution, especially, like, the beginning stages of how life came from non-life, I can explain that to you if you want. Like, if that's not something you know, I can explain it to you, I can tell you, and it was, like, you know, a good faith offer of, like, hey, if you don't know this, I'm okay with telling you. And then, like, he said something, I don't remember what it was, that made me think, okay, maybe you do know this. So I was like, hey, is this something you know? Do you actually want me to, like, tell you what it is? And he got, like, mad that I wouldn't go ahead and tell him, even though I was, like, trying to make sure I wasn't telling him information he already knew. But then he said that I was condescending to him by assuming that he didn't know. By my original offer to explain it to him, if he didn't know, I was being condescending and, like, being offensive to him, even though I later was like, hey, if this is a thing that you already know, I don't have to explain it. Like, if this is a thing, I won't tell you. And he then got mad that I wouldn't just go. So that was the first thing with this person. But the thing that, like, really got me was that, as a lot of Christians will, he used the God of the gaps argument, which, if you aren't familiar with the God of the gaps, it basically says that our gaps in scientific knowledge, such as like the knowledge of like how we went from a cell membrane that has organic polymers to something that can actually be like objectively considered life by like normal scientific standards, like how we made like that from one place to another, how it went from like non-life, just organic molecules but still not life, to actually being life. Like, we don't necessarily have a perfect, my knowledge, you have to understand, I've only taken freshman biology, but we don't necessarily have a perfect explanation for that one point to another. And so that would be a quote-unquote gap in our scientific knowledge. And because we don't have a specific like current explanation for that, we never will. And therefore, it was God. Like, that's kind of the logical reasoning behind the God of the gaps. There's some sort of thing in science that we can't explain, which, by scientific standards, we would say we cannot currently explain, because there's been lots of scientific things in the past that we were not able to explain, and then later, as our, scientific knowledge and whatever evolved, we were then later able to explain it. But the way the God of the gaps argument goes is, there is scientific thing we cannot explain, scientific thing never will be explained, therefore scientific thing can be explained by God. God was the one that did it. That is basically the God of the gaps. And anyone with like the ability to understand how arguments work can see how that's not a good argument. And he was implementing that particular argument, and I was like, hey, God of the gaps, it doesn't work, this is why it doesn't work, whatever. Then he tells me that is not God, I am not doing God of the gaps, tries to tell me what God of the gaps is, and then restates his God of the gaps argument. And we went back and forth like that several times, where I was like, no, that is not God of the gaps, this is God of the gaps, and that is what you were doing. And he's like, no, I'm not doing that. He was like, no, I'm not doing that. Actually, God of the gaps is this other thing. And then he did anyway. So that was not fun. But what, like, I can't remember, I don't think I continued arguing with him much after this particular instance, but I should have just stopped the minute he did this. I gave him several sources for a lot of my arguments. So, like, he mentioned the Big Bang Theory, and he had a misunderstanding of how the Big Bang Theory works, which, like, a lot of people have a misunderstanding of how the Big Bang Theory works, so I wasn't going to hold that against him. And I found a website that it helped to explain it, and so I took, like, a quote from it, and then I linked the website so that he could, like, fact check me and read through it. And then he also asked for some examples of some stuff, and I had found a while back, I'd watched a YouTube video that like explained it far better than I ever could. So I was like, here's the video that has the examples, go watch this person explains it better than I ever could. And in the end, I had like 2 or 3 different YouTube videos, and I think 2 different links to articles or whatever to back up what I was saying. And he was like, I'm not gonna read that. Like, he just blatantly refused, even though some of the links that I gave him were answering his questions to me. He was like, I'm not going to read that. I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to do it. And I'm like, am I misunderstanding, like, what the point of this is? Like, I thought this was an argument. We were going to bring in our sources. We were going to be like, here's the information. I'm presenting it to you. Like, anyway, he was also just very condescending in general, and I should have stopped arguing with him way sooner than I did. It was an interesting experience. Overall, not a particularly enjoyable one. Those are the only 3 people I can think of off the top of my head that were just awful to try and argue with on the internet, but they are far from the only annoying people I've argued with on the internet. But I haven't done that in several years. The YouTube guy was relatively recent, but he's the only one in the past, like, 3 or 4 years. Because it was doing bad things to my blood pressure and my mental health. So I kind of stopped. And that was probably the best decision.